Very happy to be here. So I'll be reading from my new book, Plausible Wrong Answers. And I'm just showing you the cover. It's a beautiful cover created by the illustrator, Anna Navarro. She illustrated also 16 pages of the book. And it's as you can see on the front, it's a hand drawing of a branch with a cocoon or a chrysalis opening up. And what look like leaves are actually torn up pieces of standardized tests, diploma exams. And that's sort of what the poems in this book do as well, is tear into some of these standardized tests. I won't go into too much detail about the concept except when it's relevant to the poem. And so the first poem I'm going to read is called Moths. And it's, Lisa mentioned earlier that there might be a test, and I'll hit you right at the beginning with the test, if you don't mind. You don't need to answer the questions, but there it is. So here you'll see on this side of the page, on the left page, is the poem itself. It's called Moths, and you'll see that it's couplets scattered about the page. And then on the facing page are test questions to the poem. And they're also arranged in a similar manner. We'll start with the poem. Moths. Moths beat dusty wings against a pane, the only barrier between us and them. We wrap our cold bodies in each other inside the motel and flick through all the channels searching for an old movie that we saw together one time. But the guide is missing, so we decide just to make love and fall asleep to the sound of moths. Question number 20. The structure of the poem Moths serves best to A, mimic the movement of the midnight moth who searches to satiate its lust for light. B, give the impression that each couplet's landing is a new moment of the speaker's hunger for warmth and comfort. C, confuse the reader by defying the conventional left-to-right progression of the written English language. D, maximize the visual effect of white space to enhance the secluded atmosphere, the quiet night, the fleeting awareness of mortality. Or E, speak to the marginalized among us, those of us underrepresented in literature selected for high school study. We are each a pair of eyes peering in from the dark, blinded by unfamiliar light. So the correct answer was C. I'm just kidding. The next one takes a different spin on the test question. These are poems that I've been calling distractor poems. And what a distractor poem does is it takes actual test questions from a diploma exam. So these, I believe, are taken from the Alberta diploma exam. So it starts with the question, and then underneath is a poem that I've written in response to the question. And so the challenge there in this form of poetry called the distractor is to write a poem so that it matches the test question. And this one is called How to Bathe a Child. Number 28. In Seamus Heaney's poem, Mother of the Groom, the image of his glistening back in the bath, lines 2 to 3, reveals the A, depth of the mother's emotion, B, son's innocent view of the world, C, son's contentment during childhood, or D, vividness of the mother's recollections. Mother rarely recalls things vividly anymore. Images splash across the fogged glass of her memory. his glistening back in the bath, the sopping washcloth in her curled fingers, the steady trickle of a leaking toilet tank. The depth of the well in which her memories stir together like milky bathwater is unknown. Confusion pools the rims of her eyes, clings to each lash like hoarfrost. He bathes her now that she knows him again, dabs at bed sores with the sponge, views the world through the rippled scars left by last winter's case of shingles. Not that she remembers. She is innocent of the pain and the howls that rang from her body back then. She hums her contentment, a child again. When she is dried off and tucked into bed, he drops a kiss on each closed eyelid, 2 rocks into a bottomless pond.
Wow.
Thank you. So this one doesn't have any questions following it. It's a poem. Actually, it's a more on the personal side. It's a poem written about a memory of my childhood. I grew up partially in the community of West Hillhurst, one of our oldest neighborhoods, and the house we lived in was very old. And I remembered helping my father replace the walls one by one. So this poem is called Tearing Down Walls. You cracked the ribs of that old house with only a crowbar and a craving for space. We, your sons, followed behind you, gathered splintered scraps, made a dry pile like kindling, as though we were preparing to burn it all down. You leaned, sweaty and coated with dust that must have been over a century old, against the bare frame and sipped beer in the space where the wall once was. Wooden beams hold like ancient bones. Our house groans under the gravity of time. Tomorrow we will help you put up new walls where the old ones were. Seal the space that exists only now, leaving you visible as I lie in bed and watch your ribs rise and fall with each drawing in of breath laced with ancient dust. A pile of wood between us waits for one of us to light a match. Okay. Now this is another one from a memory, not a memory, but yeah, I guess sort of living in the same neighborhood. When I was young, living in West Hillhurst, I don't think the property values were as high as they are now, and so houses were sometimes left empty and abandoned. And that can lead a child's imagination to run wild. And so this one is a distractor poem. And so it's called There is the Hammer. Number 24. The detail that serves to emphasize and reinforce the idea of uselessness in Patrick White's poem, Not a Mine, Not a Grave, Not a Hole in the Earth, is A, enfeebled as the hand that's forgotten how to use it, lines 7 to 8. B, here are some eggs of coal in a sack, line 11. C, there is the hammer with only one claw, line 13. Or D, the wide rip-toothed two-handled saw that gripped and buckled, lines 15 to 16. This old forgotten house of crumbled plaster and sagging floorboards, of urine-stained wallpaper and mildewed mattresses with springs protruding like ribs through a punctured lung. The basement is an abandoned nest of concrete and exposed wiring. A hockey stick lies splintered in a corner, tape unraveled from the handle, enfeebled as the hand that has forgotten how to use it, as the dusted lung that has forgotten how to hold air. He pisses in the corner, leans his head against concrete, zips up, buckles over, coughing in the dust-swirled air. Where pink lungs were, here are some eggs of coal in a sack, scraping each other dry as he retches. He lifts a crippled hand to his mouth, and there is the hammer with only one claw, a warped fist that has gouged out eyes in back alleys, has torn skin and flesh like the wide rip-toothed, two-handled saw that gripped and buckled when it bit into bone and tendon, lost him his job and a lot of blood and skin. He picks up the hockey stick with his good hand and uses it to sweep the cans and needles off the mattress, then lies himself down among springs and mold. He is a mass of stitched together skin over bone, puffed and raw. And as dusk seeps into the basement like smoke, he pulls his knees up as close to his chest as he still can, and curls, an unhatched bird, air whistling through his broken shell. Thank you.
Lovely.